And welcome to A Gamer's Guide to Productivity. Of course, it's your main host, Nico Penguin, and today we're going to be diving into wellness with none other than Richard Blake, who's also known as the Breath Geek. You guys are going to be in for a treat today. His expertise spans breathwork, nutrition, CrossFit, psychotherapy, and he's here to help us unlock the connection between body and mind. So, whether you're a gamer sitting for hours or someone looking for a holistic approach to mental and physical well being, Richard offers unique insights into how breathing and movement can transform your daily routine. So, we're thrilled to have you on today, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nico. Yeah, great to be here.
And for those that may not be aware, what is breathwork?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few different facets of it. I think everyone who hears breath work, they come up to me and they say, "Oh, I do breath work," and they have a different idea of what it is. So I like to classify it in sort of four different ways. There's
Mm,
functional breathing. That's like people who have asthma who need to work on breathing better, athletes who maybe have poor carbon dioxide tolerance and they need to increase that to improve their athletic performance, or people who have, again, dysfunctional breathing and it's causing ADHD, so they can't focus because, again, they've got issues with carbon dioxide tolerance, and as well things like snoring and apnea and dyspnea and things like that.
mm,
I work with people on functional breathing. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect would be pranayama. Most people are probably, if they've heard of breath work, it's probably pranayama. That's yogic breathing. So that comes from
mm.
India, and if they've done yoga, they've probably done a little bit of breath work. But there's a huge, like a huge amount of different breathwork styles in pranayama. Then there's again, maybe the next most famous one is Wim Hof breathwork, which is
Right.
Tumo, which is voluntary hyperventilation followed by intermittent hypoxia. So it's basically breathing really hard and then holding your breath. And that is very popular because gets you into altered states. It gets you into non-ordinary states of consciousness. You can get high on your own supply, as Wim would say. And Wim Hof is also very famous for doing ice man things like
Right.
ice baths and climbing to Everest Base Camp in just a pair of shorts, and having E. coli injected into him and creating an antibody response just with breath work and not getting sick. Then the fourth category I see is it's called conscious connected breathing, and that is the one that I did my PhD study in. So that's where my sort of main expertise, and I ran the largest randomized control trial ever done on this type of breath work. And this one is more like creating a space. We call it a breathwork ceremony, that
Hmm.
people can go and do really deep work, do really deep, like, emotional work on trauma. People often get mystical experiences, and they put people in fMRIs, and they've done this breath work, and they've shown that people's brainwave changes and their cerebral hemodynamics, which means their blood flow, are changing to the same extent as someone who takes a moderate dose of psilocybin mushrooms. So
Wow.
people get these really altered states. So that's a kind of briefish overview of breathwork, but it's quite a vast category.
Oh, no, certainly, because I figured out once I heard I read the book by James Nestor, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, and it radicalized my understanding of breathing. So when I saw that that's what you specialized in, I was like, I need to get Richard on the show because there are some gamers that have no idea the importance of breathing, and especially if they're living a sedentary lifestyle, playing a lot of video games in front of the computer screen a lot. They might be breathing through their mouth. They might be accidentally hyperventilating, especially when the adrenaline rush, and it's very important. And I wanted to get your insight because you decided to want to get into that. So, what made you even want to get into that in the first place?
Yeah, so I had a lot of problems with addiction and depression and anxiety as a younger man, and I started seeing a therapist, and they noticed that when I would talk about difficult emotional material, my breath would become quite short, and I would take really deep breaths, and I get this sensation that I just couldn't breathe enough in. And he suggested I go see this guy called the Breath Guru, this guy
Mm,
in England called Alan Dolan. And I thought he was going to go and teach me how to breathe, as in like how to breathe functionally, but he does conscious connected breathing. And so he taught me this technique. We had like a 90-minute session where he I lay down, I do this kind of, again, a type of voluntary over breathing in and out through my mouth. And at that stage, I'd done a fair amount of different therapies. I'd done a lot of meditation, I'd done Reiki, I'd done yoga, I'd done hypnotherapy. All these things were like, yeah, this is quite good. I think something's happening. I think I feel a little bit better. But then when I came back from this 40-minute journey
mhm.
with conscious connected breathing, I was just like, oh my God. I sat up, I looked at him, I was like, where did I go? I was off in another dimension with like just a dimension of like pink fluffy clouds.
Wow.
And it felt like 2 minutes had passed, but actually I'd been breathing in this way for 40 minutes. I immediately signed my girlfriend, then girlfriend, now wife, up for a session for the next day. And she also had this amazing experience. We then trained with Alan Dolan and the Breath Guru teacher training school, and we now work for him as well. We work on his teacher training school as well, teaching people to be breath workers. So yeah, it really helped me with my depression, my addiction. It was like, talk therapy is good,
Hmm.
but for a lot of people it doesn't work, especially CBT. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is what most people get prescribed if they have any mental health issues. Generally a doctor will say, hey, go to try some CBT, because it's the most evidence-based thing. And the reason it's the most evidence-based thing is just because it's the easiest to measure. It's sort of kind of the tail wagging the dog in that area,
Right.
in that way. But 40% of people don't respond to CBT for anxiety, at least. So my PhD was on breathwork and anxiety. So I kind of have a lot of stats to support the anxiety stuff. And then of those 40% of people who respond to CBT, so for the 40% of people who it does work for, 60% of them relapse within a few months. So
Wow.
it's not particularly effective. So I I was studying psychotherapy at university in the UK, and I started learning these types of statistics. And I started learning like psychotherapists have some of the highest suicide rates in the world and some of the
Wow.
biggest burnout rates. And I think partly that is because their tools they're not that effective. SSRIs, they are often less effective than placebo, less effective than sunlight, less effective than exercise for treating depression. And I discovered this conscious connected breathing technique, and I was just like, why don't more people know about this? This is so powerful. It's helping me so much. Everyone I teach it to it's helping so much. And I was working for a charity in the UK during the pandemic, where we were
Hmm.
giving free mental health services to NHS practitioners. So the NHS is the National Health Service in the UK. So
Okay.
doctors, nurses, administrators, all getting free treatments. And they would call me up and they'd be like, I've heard about this breathwork thing. And I heard, I get free sessions with this charity. And I was like, yeah, we'll sign you in. Like, let's do some breathwork. And they'd be like, but can you give me some evidence that it works? And I was like, no, sorry, it is free. And they're like, no, thanks. Put the phone down. So I was like, right, I've got to do something about this. So I moved to California, enrolled in a PhD program, and then conducted this study. And it was phenomenally effective. The study showed that in just 6 sessions over 6 weeks, that people with clinically high levels of anxiety went down to subclinical ratings of anxiety. And that paper is under peer review at the moment. So yeah, I can't remember
About that, but that's actually phenomenal. And you did mention the conscious breathing aspect, and I want to touch base on that because you mentioned that you essentially were transported elsewhere by consciously breathing. Now, for those that may not know, are we subconsciously breathing now is what you're saying, and when you stop doing everything and just focus on your breathing, you can essentially self fix a lot of issues, or what essentially goes into conscious breathing and how does that improve our mental?
Yeah, good question. So, yes. We are breathing unconsciously. So breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system that we can directly access. We can't slow down our heart consciously. We can slow down our heart by slowing down our breathing. We can't affect our digestion and all these other things. The breath is the only thing that works unconsciously and consciously. So when you're doing conscious connected breathing, it's a really difficult technique. So you do need a facilitator or a trained breath worker to be monitoring you. So it's not really something you can do on an app. There are apps out there. I don't
Hmm.
think they're particularly effective,
Right.
especially not for first timers, because it tends to take people maybe 4 or 5 sessions with a coach to get the technique really dialed in so that you can create those changes in brain waves and changes in brain blood flow. And it is a difficult technique, and that's good because say you're walking along or you're driving a car, if you
Hmm.
accidentally started doing this technique and started meeting your ancestors and meeting God, that's going to be quite dangerous. So it is good that it's hard to get into, because it's not a state you want to sort of, as I say, suddenly be walking along and then you're as high as if you'd taken a moderate dose of mushrooms. So the technique itself involves mouth breathing. So you're if you've read James Nestor or Patrick McEwen, very against mouth breathing. I am trained with Patrick McEwen and the Oxygen Advantage. They don't have a problem with this because the mouth breathing is only going on for 40 minutes at a time. It's not affecting your carbon dioxide sensitivity, we don't think. Someone needs to do that study. But so you're breathing in and out through your mouth. Your inhale is much longer than your exhale, and you are connecting your breath. So normally when we breathe, there's a pause at the end of the exhale. But in
Hmm.
conscious connected breathing, you are removing that pause and creating this kind of circular breath. And you're over breathing, as I say, voluntary over breathing, voluntary hyperventilation, some people call it. And what I can go into more details, what's happening in terms of like carbon dioxide, respiratory alkalosis, and things like that. But basically, you're kind of hyperventilating in a controlled way, and then
Right.
that puts you into this non-ordinary state of consciousness.
So when you say circular breathing, no pausing, are you saying effectively you're bringing in air and not letting it simmer and then just immediately exiting out carbon dioxide and then just cycling it through without giving essentially a chance to just like pause, enabling you to almost have like at some point like pockets of like recycled air within your lungs kind of thing?
Yeah, so you always have a bit of a pocket of air every time you breathe. There is always air that just is in dead space. But yes, what you're doing is you're breathing in slightly more than you're breathing out, and people often struggle to understand the actual mechanics of that. But if you think about blowing up a balloon, your lungs
Mm-hmm.
are like a balloon. It takes a lot of effort and time to blow that balloon up, right?
Right.
But then as soon as you let go, the pressure from the outside makes the air leave much quicker than going in. And that's kind of how it is with the conscious connected breathing. You're breathing in for a rate of a ratio about 4 to 1. So it inhales about 4 times longer than your exhale. But because of
Wow.
pressure and
Mm-hmm.
gravity, you don't need much effort on that exhale. And your blood oxygen saturation will be going up from sort of a normal range is 95 to 98%. It probably does go up to 99 to 100%. And there's this thing called the Bohr effect. This is getting very technical, but the Bohr effect is basically the hemoglobin won't release oxygen to the cells without carbon dioxide. So what's happening is something in the brain. Someone labeled it, Reinwein and Williams in their paper in 2007 labeled it transient hypofrontality. So what's
Mm.
happening is less oxygen is getting to the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex of the brain is the part that's is the sort of the most evolved, and one of its job is protecting us from pain. So this is kind of why talk therapy doesn't work for a lot of people, is because their prefrontal cortex is protecting them from the emotional pain, from the maladaptively
Mm.
stored emotions, from the trauma. Whereas if you downregulate that prefrontal cortex, that protective part, those emotions surface. So this is why in conscious connected breathing, people who just think, oh, I'm fine, I'm looking forward to this breath work, they just have these sort of spontaneous releases of emotions that they weren't
Mhm.
expecting. Is a very healing process, and something we really like encourage. We really encourage the emotional release in conscious connected breathing. And often, people will say, "Oh, I did therapy for 5 years, didn't cry once. Did one session of breath work, and I cried my eyes out, and healed this thing from 25 years ago that I never thought I would get over."
Wow, that's actually really intriguing. And you mentioned multiple times that there are strong correlations between doing conscious breathing, breath work, so to speak, and mental health, and almost like a complete alternative. But in my head, I'm also looking at it like when you combine the two, it really is going to set you up to really enhance your mental well being.
Yeah, for sure. And this technique was invented by Dr. Stanislav Grof, who's like a Czech American psychiatrist. And he came up with this term of non-specific amplifiers. So he did a lot of research with LSD and mushrooms for mental health back in the 60s when they were legal. And yeah, he realized that LSD, mushrooms, breath work are non-specific amplifiers. If you want to go and do breath work at a festival and listen to music, it's going to amplify your response. Just as going to taking LSD and listening to the Grateful Dead, as the cliche goes, is going to enhance your experience of the Grateful Dead or whatever music you like. Or if you use it as a therapeutic tool, you use it as a ceremony, you use it in a spiritual way, and you're hoping to connect to your god or gods or spirits, it's going to enhance that. If you're using it to heal your trauma, it's going to enhance that. So it's really about setting and the sort of the direction that you and the intention of what you are using that breath work for. So if you just randomly did conscious connected breathing right now whilst on a podcast, you probably feel a little bit altered, but you wouldn't necessarily heal trauma, start crying, that kind of thing. You need that intention.
And then to get a little bit into more of the specific techniques or some of the intricacies, does having like specific posture and having a specific environment away from, I would say, like noise, do any of those play factors into your conscious breathing?
Yes, so for sure, when we're doing conscious connected breathing, I do it in person and online, and we do it as in groups as well as one-to-ones. And we will say, yeah, you need to be in a private space. One, because we don't want you to be distracted. Two, because of confidentiality. If there's other people in the group, I've had it times where I'm doing a big group, and then someone's kids come and sit on the bed, or someone's husband comes and sit on the bed and is just looking at everyone on the screen. I'm like, we've got confidentiality here. Can you please
Right.
not be, voyeuristically looking at people healing their trauma or whatever they're doing? So yes, you definitely want it to be quiet. You definitely want to be somewhere relaxed where you can, if you feel like you need to cry, you can do that without fear or worry or judgment. And just doing it on the train, I would not advise that at all.
And then for you, I also saw that you do not only do the breath work, you went on a huge journey. And was that journey in order for you to learn breath work, or was that a journey for something else? Because I saw
Yeah.
you in Peru and Brazil and in different places. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what's going on over here?
Yeah, I guess I struggled a lot in my sort of my teens and early 20s with depression, and uh, was looking to find myself, and travel definitely helped that. I know that's a cliche to say, to find oneself, and I did try all sorts of different things. I worked in an ashram, got kicked out of the Osho ashram in Pune, India, for not buying into the cult. Learned Reiki in Cambodia. Did an ayahuasca apprenticeship in Peru. Moved all around, but ultimately concluded that conscious connected breathwork was the most useful thing. And that is sort of, I think a lot of people struggle these days because they don't have a sense of purpose in life. And certainly I felt that. But once I realized, okay, I'm going to do something with breathwork, I'm going to do this study, and I'm going to train other breath workers, and I'm going to try and raise the standards of breathwork in the world by, I'm sort of creating a foundation as well. It gives me a reason to get out of bed, because there have been times in my life, many times in my life, where I just couldn't get out of bed. So I think finding purpose and having to go far away was a big part of that.
And because you're on the healthy side of breathing, what would you say are some signs that someone's breathing, their pattern specifically, is contributing to their anxiety or their fatigue without them maybe even realizing it?
Yeah, a lot of signs. So most people are over breathing. So they're breathing in excess of metabolic demands, and that creates a kind of cascade of problems. Is in like, you know, because you have chemoreceptors for carbon dioxide, just like with, let's say, coffee. If you have one coffee every day, you're not really getting much benefit from that coffee. If you have two coffees, then you really feel that coffee. Whereas the next time you
Mm,
get used to two coffees, then you need three coffees. And that kind of happens with carbon dioxide when you become intolerant to it. You overbreathe to deal with that intolerance, and then you overbreathe more to deal with that intolerance. So um, that's really what the oxygen advantage teaches, and what I teach through their technique. And we really encourage people to nose breathe, as you will know from James Nestor's book. Nose breathing is so much more effective than mouth breathing. So mouth breathing, our mouth is designed for talking, swallowing, chewing, spitting, vomiting.
hmm
Our nose is designed for breathing, and that's pretty much it. Our nose filters and humidifies the air, so it filters it with the mucosal lining and with the hairs. So that's filtering out bacteria, viruses, mold, all these things, pollutants. Whereas if you breathe through your mouth, you're not getting that filtration. And also, humidify when you breathe in and out through the nose, which conditions the air to go down into the lungs to create better oxygen perfusion, which means the oxygen that actually reaches your lungs gets more readily, easily transferred to the blood. Whereas if you breathe in and out through the mouth, you'll notice that you lose a lot of air. So if you're going to steam up your sunglasses, you don't do it through your mouth. Sorry, through your nose. You breathe out through your mouth because the
right.
mouth releases the water vapor. So for people who are exercising, and people who often feel dehydrated, if they're mouth breathing, they're going to dehydrate themselves much quicker if they breathe in and out through their mouth. Another thing the nose does is create nasal nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is quite a new thing, nitric oxide. I think they only discovered it about 20, 30 years ago. But nitric oxide, what it does is, one, it relaxes you. So when you're breathing in and out through your nose, you're more likely to be less anxious. If anxiety is a problem, check if
hmm
you're breathing in and out through your mouth, switch to nasal breathing. Nasal nitric oxide is also a vasodilator, meaning it opens up the alveoli and the bronchi, meaning you can breathe more easily. So yeah, breathing in and out through your nose is really important, and breathing in and out through your nose at night. That is a big one. So this is quite a trendy thing you might have seen in James Nestor's things, mouth taping. Have you heard of mouth taping, Nico?
I did it.
Yeah.
It took me a whole month to retrain my body to only breathe through my nose. It took 30 days, but the difference was like night and day.
Mm. Yeah. What did you notice?
Well, from when I first started mouth breathing, when I first started like journaling and writing down the differences from when I would go to sleep with breathing through my mouth, I would realize like I will wake up throughout the night, have like panic attacks, a lot of nightmares. Once I started like training myself to force myself to only breathe through my nose, there was way less panic attacks, way less nightmares. I could fall asleep and stay asleep, and it enabled me to wake up easier with more energy as if I was fully rested. And I also tested myself to see if through mouth breathing, and I don't recommend this to anybody, if through mouth breathing I had more or less energy through like 8 hours of sleep, or if with 4 to 5 hours of sleeping through my nose with like 3 to 4 REM cycles, I could get almost the same equivalent. And for me personally, I don't know about others, I almost saw the correlation, like 8 hours of mouth sleeping with 4 to 5 hours of no sleeping. I felt almost the same, if not a little bit better.
Wow, that's a powerful testimonial for sure. Yeah. So you actually you tested that. You restricted yourself to only 4 hours sleep, and yeah, well, that's impressive self quantification.
No, yes, and it's because I do so much. Productive gamer, so I try to make sure everything I do is productive. So when times I don't have enough hours of sleep, I try to do the biohacking. So when I saw that you're into biohacking, I started researching like the REM cycles, and the number one common denominator I kept running into was breathing. Was regardless of everything else, if I didn't have a proper breathing technique, it's almost like it goes out the window. Because as you mentioned, when I breathe through my mouth, water vapor goes out like crazy. So I will wake up very thirsty, dry mouth and dry throat, and I'm like parched. Whereas with closing my mouth and just breathing through my nose and only like a sip of water before sleeping, I can wake up and I still have moisture in my mouth, and I don't have as much of a need to drink water when I wake up.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. You asked about telltale signs that someone is mouth breathing, and you've given a couple there. So if you're waking up first thing in the morning and your mouth is dry, that's probably a sign you've been mouth breathing. If you wake up and you have really bad breath, probably a sign you've been mouth breathing. If you have drool or saliva on your pillow, also a sign you're probably mouth breathing. Snoring as well. Snoring is not just like annoying because your partner or your dog gets woken up by you. It is actually a real stress on your heart. And if people are into self
Mm,
quantification and they have something like the Aura Ring, which I have, it'll show you areas of apnea in the night, sleep apnea. And when there is suppressed oxygen like that for extended periods, that can put real stress on your heart, which can lead to pretty serious problems. So mouth taping, what kind of mouth tape did you use, Nico?
this was like 6 or 7 years ago. I think I might have just used like something like, I don't know, like duct tape. I didn't have like actual like I know there's like actual tape that I've seen like nurses and stuff do for skin, but
Hmm.
I didn't have any. I was just like, what can I use? Because I couldn't get it to work, but I tried it and it worked. After a month, it was phenomenal, but it hurt when I woke up and I had to take it
Mhm.
off.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of tapes out there now. There's a big market for it.
Mm,
The Oxygen Advantage one, people like, especially for kids, because that they don't actually tape your mouth shut. They've just got some. It's like myo tape, which goes
mm.
around your lips and just sort of uses elasticity to keep them closed. So you can still take a drink, you
So
can still
cool.
speak. It's not very good if you have a beard, but yeah, I'd say for children and people who are clean shaven, it's good. The one I use is just what you said, the nurse's tape. So it's called micropore tape, and you just get it
Mm,
from any pharmacy chemist, and it's like $2, and lasts you several months. And you only need like a postage stamp size amount. You don't have
mhm.
to tape across your whole mouth like a hostage. You just need to tape the middle bits of the mouth to keep the lips pursed shut at night. So I can still talk out the side of my mouth like a ventriloquist, and I can still yawn because I've still got that little gap at the side of my mouth. So for people who are worried about suffocating, you're not going to suffocate, because if you absolutely have to, you can just breathe out the side of your mouth.
And I did want to also ask how nutrition and breath work go hand in hand to optimize well being.
Good question. I've never really thought about how they go hand in hand, but I guess um, if you're thinking about being healthy
Hmm.
and mental health, there's normally, I guess you could say, kind of legs of a table. I'd say it's a big table with like 8 different legs. And if you have bad nutrition and you fix that nutrition, then you're sort of making sure that leg of the table is not unbalancing things. So breath work, I guess, for me, the way I've used it, if I'm thinking about a real link between nutrition and breath work, is I used to have binge eating disorder. So I used to be a fitness model, and I would have to diet down to silly levels of body fat, and over time I developed this binge eating disorder. And one of the ways I helped myself recover was obviously the conscious connected breathing, going
Right.
deep into my sort of maladaptively stored memories and childhood stuff that contributed to the binge eating disorder. But also, I would do breath work. I still do breath work just before I'm eating, because food for me became a source of anxiety, because I was like, am I going to overeat? Am I going to
Mm.
lose control? So what I do now is the 4-7-8 breath, and I do this with my wife. wife, obviously she's a breath worker, she doesn't think I'm weird, but I basically, the 4-7-8 breath is so it's a count. So it's an inhale for a count of 4 through the nose, and then a
Hmm.
hold for a count of 7, and then an exhale through the nose or the mouth for a count of 8. And I just do 4 rounds of that. I close my eyes, and there is something about that pause, that hold, that where you just like squeeze, where you're squeezing your breathing muscles effectively, and then that tension release. I find that incredibly relaxing. And there have been studies done. Well, the most recent study was comparing 4-7-8 breath to cyclical sighing for pregnancy, and both were really effective for pain reduction during pregnancy. I haven't seen a specific study on 4-7-8 breath for food related anxiety, but I think that's a really effective tip before eating, to just ground and center and de-stress, so that you're not stress eating, because you can know everything in the world about the most healthiest diet possible, but if you can't actually override your sort of, base nature, your greed, or my greed, because you're so stressed and anxious, then yeah, that breathwork technique can be really nice to help with that.
And now that makes me want to think, because I got accustomed to doing natural 4-4-4 breathing by just breathing in for 4 counts, holding it for 4 counts, and exhaling for 4 counts. But you mentioned 4-7-8. Is 4-7-8 specifically for when you're trying to like calm down or do conscious breathing? Or is that something that you could technically, if you improve your lung capacity, also do as a standard breathing rate?
Yeah, so anything where your exhale is longer than your inhale is going to relax you. So um,
Mm.
where you've got an inhale for 4, and then effectively an exhale for 7 plus 8, so 15 there. So your exhale is almost 15 seconds. Same with the 4-4-4, or the box breathing. Your inhale is 4, and then your exhale is about 12. And so when we breathe in and out through our nose, we're activating the parasympathetic portion of our autonomic nervous system, which is the relax, the rest and digest. The sympathetic portion is the fight or flight. When we're breathing in and out through our mouth, you're activating the sympathetic, the fight or flight portion of the autonomic nervous system. Similarly, when you breathe, when your inhale is longer than your exhale, like in conscious connected breathing, like when you're exercising, you are activating the sympathetic, you are upregulating, you are stimulating yourself. So yeah, that's a couple of things about stress reduction. Um, we have spoken. I was discussing this with another breath worker. This idea, I coined this term called orthonomia,
Mm.
and it's basically obsession with breath. People who get so obsessed with breathing right that it causes them anxiety. And some people, they've read James Nestor, and they're like, the perfect breathing rate is 5.5 breaths per minute, and my inhale must be 5.5 seconds and my exhale must be 5.5 seconds, or I'm going to die. And that's not the case. Most people cannot breathe 5 to 6 breaths per minute. 12 to 18 breaths per minute is a kind of normal rate. And yeah, the other breath worker I was talking to said he'd met a guy who was just trying to get 5.5 breaths per minute, because he read in James Nestor that people in Tai Chi were able to do that, and he was just stressing himself out all the time. So with breath work, there's good is good enough. You don't have to have perfect breath. Slower is better. Fewer breaths per minute is generally better, but you don't have to obsess about it and get anxious because you're not breathing perfectly.
Okay, so I'm not gonna obsess about it, but I've dived in so much. I've done certain techniques to try to increase my lung capacity to hold my breath, only because my dad likes to swim a lot and he holds his breath when he goes under the water. And I realized when I heard the book that if I increase the lung capacity, it becomes easier to do that, even though I didn't think about extending the exhale to up to 12 to 15 counts. I'm going to try that, but I won't obsess about it. And I do want to ask you, because I've read this article from consciousbreathing.com about the fact that there's a correlation between longevity and low breathing rate, and the fact that for the animals on this planet that live the longest, they have the slowest and lowest breathing rate per minute, like from the whale, the bowhead whale that can live up to 211 years, to like the clam that can live 507 years, to tortoises that can live 200 years. And they noticed those correlations between low breathing rates. And as you mentioned, the lower, the better. And I've read this so many times, but I still don't understand, why is this? Is it because like we have like a number of amount of breaths in our lungs, and like the less we use it, the more we can live? Or like, why is that a correlation?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. So, the naked mole rat is what often gets cited in these types of studies. So, don't Google it; it looks disgusting.
Unless you
But
think impossible.
yeah, it lives underground. It's got no fur. It's like the ugliest rat you'll ever see. But it breathes at like 2 breaths per minute, and they put it in the lab, and they've like tried to give it cancer, and they can't even give it cancer. It's so resilient. It's so lives so long, and they think it's partly to do with yeah, its breathing rate. Some people suggest that breathing is like rusting your inside. So oxygen, you've heard of like free radicals, reactive oxygen species. When you're breathing, you're creating reactive oxygen species, which then creates free radicals and inflammation. But I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true. I don't think breathing just causes like internal rust. That sounds very basic to me. So this is a fascinating area of research that a lot more needs to be done on. But yeah, supposedly yogis, they found yogis in the mountains who, they haven't eaten in like 80 years, and they're breathing 1 breath every hour, and they're 159 years old. But I think a fair bit of that is mythology. And I don't know if you saw about the blue zones recently, and if you heard about who won the Ig Nobel Prize.
Oh no, not yet.
So do you know what the blue zones are? You had so the okay, well, basically the
Put me
blue
on.
zones. There's a documentary on Netflix about them. It was a big study. It was about these 5 or 6 areas around the world where they had like a disproportionate amount of centenarians, and it was like Loma Vista,
Oh
California,
yes,
Costa
yes, yes, yes.
Rica. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And everyone's been like, oh, what do the blue people in the blue zones do? Oh, they drink a little bit of alcohol. Oh, they do a little bit of exercise every day. Oh, they have social community. Have you heard of the Ig Nobel Prize?
I heard of the blue zones because when I was researching the longevity, supposedly there was a correlation that they are in areas where there's better oxygen levels, supposedly, but I haven't heard of the that one.
Okay, so the Ig Nobel Prize is like the Nobel Prize, but it's for the most ridiculous science. So the Ig Nobel Prize this year was for exposing that the whole blue zone thing was just a complete fraud.
Mm.
These areas are the areas of the world with the most pension fraud. So in this area in Japan, they've got all these 100-year-old people, but this area was during where the nuclear bomb was dropped, so no one has birth
Mm.
certificates. So people were basically saying, "Oh yeah, I'm 65. I get to stop working and get my pension now," when maybe they're only like 45. Or
Mm.
they've found incidences of like where an elderly person was collecting a pension, they died, they didn't bother to do a ceremony, they just collected their pension for another 20 years. So the whole blue zone thing has been was basically debunked, and we've been for the last few years in the biohacking sphere looking at the blue zones and being like, oh, we have to do what the blue zone people do. Things like, oh, they have high oxygen, maybe that's it. And it's all absolute nonsense.
That's so funny. Not because I remember somebody telling me about it. I was like, I don't know. I think if you incorporate what James Nestor is saying, and you just breathe right, you have that capacity to do so. I think everybody has a chance. But to know that now that that's certified debunked, it kind of confirms that it's not specific. I mean, unless there's somebody comes up with research and does confirm certain areas in the world have a better oxygen area, I guess. But for you, I did want to know, like, when you were in these different areas, did you ever experience any drastic differences in like oxygen, and like this area was easier to breathe, or I had a little bit more fun, or because I was in this mountain range it was a little bit harder, but I could get a little bit easier breath work in?
Yeah, so for sure, altitude affects respiration, and a lot of athletes go and train at an altitude. You know, Tour de France cyclists, they're all training at altitude, and that is because there's less pressure at altitude. So without that pressure, there's there's the oxygen dissociation curve effectively is a way of explaining how oxygen gets transported into from the lungs to the blood cells. When there's less pressure, less oxygen gets delivered to the cells, and when that happens, the body reacts positively. You know, it's a hormetic stressor. Hormetic stressors are, it's that idea of like, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So like, you know,
Right.
ice baths, a little bit of ice bath makes you more resilient, but too much ice baths and, you know, you drown like Jack in the Titanic. So oxygen deprivation is a small hormetic stressor, and you can
Mm.
simulate altitude training with the oxygen advantage with these little exercises, breath hold exercises. And specifically, if you do 5 of these breath hold exercises where you get your blood oxygen saturation down from about 95 to 98 to below 91, you get a spleen contraction. So spleen is where
Mm.
hemoglobin is produced, and your spleen will contract and release more hemoglobin into the blood, so you've got more oxygen carrying capacity. So you can go to the Alps or the Rockies and train at altitude, or you can just do some breath holds wherever you live. So yeah, altitude would be a big one for where you can breathe more difficultly. So at altitude, it is harder to breathe, but you do adapt after a few days and positively adapt.
Right, because you can't just turn it off like you could do it doing at the at the house.
Right.
And then in your case, how would you say your journey throughout the years as a teenager has evolved from fitness to now? Like, do you see it? It's a little bit easier because you focus so much in breath work that now, when you do some exercise, you don't have to put as much effort in, or do you now, because it's easier to breathe, you can now push yourself even harder and challenge yourself more?
Yeah, so I do CrossFit. I compete in, you know, local competitions. I'm not a pro or anything like that, but I I think I've improved a lot with the oxygen. Well, I know I've improved. You know, whenever I do the Open from a few years ago, I can see where I came in the world, and you know, each year keeps going up, even at age 37, when you know most people are retiring. And I think a big part of that is because I do work on the breath work. You know, a big part of CrossFit is recovery and doing breath work for recovery, putting yourself into that rest and digest state with breath work is a real advantage, because a lot of people just simply don't know how to relax because it's just go go go. They think they're relaxing on their phone, but actually they're just having more stimulation. They're in fight or flight. They're running around being busy all the time, and they never actually get to rest. So when they're breaking down their muscles from lifting weights, they're never actually giving themselves a chance to rebuild and get stronger.
And would you say because you're able to do breath work, it almost enables you to tap into the quote unquote zone a little bit easier because you're able to consciously focus on what you're doing with breathing, and you almost like throw everything else out the window that's a distraction and you're just able to focus on this one thing?
Yeah, for sure, it can be a good distraction from the pain. You know, they're the best CrossFitters, certainly at my gym, seem to be the ones with pretty high pain tolerance. You know, they can push themselves to vomiting. I've never vomited. They call me, you know, pussy for that, but that's the CrossFit mentality. Um, but yeah, when it does get uncomfortable, like it does in most sports, just being able to focus on your breathing can be a real beneficial thing. And as I mentioned, like there was that study done with people giving birth, and they looked at those breathwork studies, 2 breathwork techniques, the 478 and deep diaphragmatic breathing, and both of them were reducing the pain compared to no breathing effectively. So yeah. The idea of how breathwork can help with exercise is one, it can make the pain more tolerable. And
Hmm.
two, when you're doing carbon dioxide sensitivity training, like the oxygen advantage, like those breath holds, you can effectively do more with less. You're more efficient with your oxygen carrying capacity. And as carbon dioxide builds up, as you get more and more fatigued in your exercise, you can tolerate more carbon dioxide. So you can go longer without breaking down.
And how would you say that this is breath work as a whole is going to be evolving in the coming years, especially now with this rapid amount of technology coming through?
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions about breathwork. As I said, there wasn't much research
Hmm.
done when I started my PhD 4 years ago. A fair bit more has come out since then and is in the pipeline. Um, but capnometry, I think, is something that we really need. Is like, a lot of people talk about carbon dioxide sensitivity and carbon dioxide tolerance, and we don't really have a very good way of testing that. We have something called the body oxygen level test. It's sort of a breath hold test, but it's really subjective. So I think in that regard, it is, we're going to be able to do better research. And there are going to be apps coming out. I've actually just invested in an app called 5.5, and they are getting licenses from like Warner Brothers to do breathwork to music, to like big stars like Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran. And you're going to be doing breathwork that's timed to the beats of their music. And it's going to
Wow.
be a little bit like Soul Cycle. It's going to be
Hmm.
like, it's a lot of influencers and trendy people doing breathwork classes on an app. And sorry, a bit like Peloton, more because you're doing it from home, but you're doing it in a
Hmm.
group with other people, and there's a live instructor or a recorded instructor. So, yeah, that kind of breathwork I think is going to be quite popular.
And then for gamers that might be listening and they're thinking, you know what, Dr. Richard has some valid points. I want to start this wellness journey today, and I want to start doing the breathing, and I want to focus on this. What would you say are some of like the first three steps that they should start to do if they're really interested in starting this wellness journey?
Well, I guess the first thing would be awareness, to notice when they may be breathing dysfunctionally. So, like we mentioned, during sleep, if they wake up and they're drooling on their pillow, they have dry mouth, that kind of thing, they're snoring, that would be a piece of awareness to suggest they need to fix something there. And then during the day, if they feel anxious, is their breath affected? That is their breath causing their anxiety? Because breath and anxiety is sort of bi-directional. You can
Mm.
be anxious because of, let's say, a stressor at work, and that can affect your breathing, or you can be breathing dysfunctionally, and that can be creating your anxiety. So maybe become aware what happens when you get anxious. Does your breathing speed up? Do you go to mouth breathing? Do you get the sensation of breathlessness? Do you start to hyperventilate and go into panic? Because panic disorders often are just related to dysfunctional breathing. Often they're related to actual life stresses and things like that. But yeah, another thing that we tell people when they have a panic disorder is actually not to take a deep breath, because when people are panicking, they are hyperventilating, they're blowing off all their carbon dioxide. And as I mentioned earlier, the Bohr effect, the hemoglobin will not release oxygen to the cells if there's no carbon dioxide there. So if someone starts to feel like they're panicking, what you want to do is have them slow their breath down. So definitely breathing in and out through the nose. The old brown paper bag trick actually works, because,
Really?
yeah, it does. Because what happens is people breathe carbon dioxide into that bag,
Hmm.
and then they're breathing that carbon dioxide back in, and they need that carbon dioxide because of the Bohr effect to release the oxygen from the hemoglobin. If you don't have a brown paper bag available, you can just cup your hands over your face and re-breathe in some of that carbon dioxide. Slow the breathing down. Just focus on the breathing, and elongate the exhales. As I said, when you elongate the exhale, you're switching the parasympathetic portion of the autonomic nervous system on.
And what would you say was your favorite part of discovering this whole world just through breathing?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of plant medicines, ayahuasca, and and things like that, all in legal places. In Peru, it's legal. I wouldn't encourage people to do illegal drugs, but I also really stress, like, do research on the right places to go, because there's a lot of bad places, and very there's bad actors in the plant medicine space. There's a lot of very untrained breath workers as well. I would say, if you want to do breath work, make sure they're certified and insured, because there's a lot of people who just are making it up as they go along, and they're causing more harm than good. So what was my favorite thing? I guess it's sort of kind of the mystical stuff. I have seen some amazing things on ayahuasca, and most people who've done ayahuasca and mushrooms and things like that, they've maybe had this connection to spirit, to God, to their ancestors, and you can get the same thing with breath work. That's why I'm doing research on breathwork and not ayahuasca. I am involved in an ayahuasca research group in the UK, but mainly as their sort of breathwork advisor. And there was a study by Ehrman from 2013 with 13,000 inpatients over 11 years, and 70% of those people had mystical experiences. So it's not just like any, it's common to have these mystical experiences. It's common to have these feelings of awe. Awe is so important for mental health. Awe is getting a lot of attention in research for curing people of depression and things like that. To have connection to something bigger than yourself. During my study, I had a lot of like subjective, quantitative bits of feedback that said, like, the reason my anxiety went from extreme clinical diagnosis of anxiety down to normal is because I had this conversation with my deceased sister during the online session, and she gave me this message, and now I don't have anxiety. So amazing stories like that do really just blow my mind, and just really give me a lot of like belief in this breath work, and that better mental health treatments are on the way.
And then for individuals that listen to you and would be interested in reaching out to you, what would be the best contact method, whether for more research, whether for group sessions or one-on-ones?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at the Breath Geek, so the_breath_geek. I also have my website, thebreathgeek.com. I am available for one-to-ones and group sessions, and I am in the process of co-creating a 12-week program that has a lot of breath, and that is with a company called Runga. So they're quite a big biohacking company, and this 12-week program is going to include all the good stuff from biohacking. So a lot of breath work, a lot of nutrition, exercise, purpose, emotional healing, a really like a really good 12-week guide to turning your life around and getting on the right track from a sort of holistic biohacking space. So that's runga.com for their momentum program.
And I did have one more conspiracy like question. Um, so because you mentioned earlier at the beginning that it does assist with a lot of breathing issues, and I read somewhere that if you do enough breath work, it can uh, alleviate a lot of like asthma. And I was under the impression that like asthma was a lifelong thing. Like if you have asthma, no matter how much you increase your lung capacity or how much breath work, like you're not gonna solve it. AKA, is that true, or is that still like a gray area?
No, there's a lot of research showing that the oxygen advantage method can heal asthma,
Oh,
or
wow.
improve the symptoms. Maybe not everyone gets healed, but maybe they need to use their inhaler 80% fewer times than they normally would. So
Wow.
yeah, it's definitely something that people with asthma should look into.
Oh wow, yeah. Woo! All right, okay. I definitely got to bring you back here. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard, for bringing a lot of insight, a lot of information, guys. If you found this at any point whatsoever insightful, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Check out Dr. Richard's website; it's flashing on the screen. That does wrap up today's conversation. Guys, make sure to check out the website, especially if you found it of any value, because he brought so much wisdom, a lot of practical tips. I don't know if you guys heard, he brought a lot of information about how to get into the zone. So if you're a gamer and you want to stay focused, intense gameplay, first person shooter, he gave you a lot of information on how to calm down your anxiety, how you stay focused. And it's very important that we're harmonizing the mind, body, and using breath because it's inspiring. So if you're curious to know more about his work, check out the website. It's really cool. There's a lot of information. You can check out what I was talking about his journey. There's a lot of cool pictures there detailing his journey or what he was up to trying to find his path before he stumbled upon breathwork. Until next time, make sure to stay mindful, stay active, keep leveling up, whether you're in gaming like me or whether you're focusing on improving your productivity IRL in the real world like Dr. Richard. Make sure to stay tuned. Other than that, take care and have a great rest.